So I thought we'd reintroduce our categories today, play around with those and set us up for where we'll be dissecting round one. We have the big issue, the pressure index, the best bits, the worst bits, the debate, the preliminary final integrity, PFI, one of our favourites, the curiosity, stuff we just don't quite know what to do with. They got that right, they got that wrong, and we are going to finish with seedings. Did I warn you about the seedings?
Yeah, they were a trap for us last year. You've gone again.
We want them to be a trap all year. So the big issue is Melbourne, isn't it? It's who can go with Melbourne. So they spent last year as the best team, and then the two finals they've just played, so the preliminary final and the grand final, are two of the greatest ever games turned in by a team. So they have pushed the standard a long way out. And the question is who can go with them?
Yeah, are you in that camp yourself?
Yep.
Yeah.
They make so much sense to me, and it just feels like they were only getting started.
Well, see, this is where we'll differ, okay? Because I think it's seriously difficult to go back-to-back at any stage. And people say, but we've had Brisbane in the early 2000s, then we've had Hawthorn, then we've had Richmond. Extraordinary teams in a time where I think the game was impacted by the two new teams coming in. And you can say that you can come at me for that if you like. But free agency come in and it opened up avenues. Hawthorn opened up avenues we hadn't really seen before. And then I think Richmond played the perfect way and did something a little bit sort of different with the way they moved the ball and the way that they set up, and Damien Hardwick tapped into this core. So two extraordinary performances, well done. Great eras, great teams. But everyone's sitting back for 6 months analysing everything you do. And the one thing I can guarantee is there's small gaps between the top 4 or 5 teams. There really are. Not a lot has to go right, not a lot has to go wrong. Melbourne only hit the top of the table after the siren in round 23. So their finals performances were unreal, and they blew the competition away. They got hold of a Geelong, which I think were there to be got, without Stewart and a few other players impacted through the course of the year with injury. So I think they were there to be got. And 15 minutes into the third quarter, we're not talking about Melbourne today at that point. So I think the gaps are small. So I'm not there with you. I'm really not. And I understand why you should be, because we haven't played a game since then. So if you're bullish on them, stay there. But I think Brisbane are a serious force. I think there are reasons why the Dogs can win it. I think it's a bit harder for the Dogs. They don't probably have the talent of the other two teams you just mentioned. I think Sydney are coming with a charge. I don't know where Port Adelaide are at. I really don't. I can mount a case for Port Adelaide missing the 8. And I could also mount a case for them finishing top 3. So I don't know about those teams. Geelong, who knows? GWS are coming. Essendon are coming. Are they a year still away? Not sure, but I'm not. This is a lock for Melbourne.
So I think the lesson of Brisbane belongs to a different time. So I think the most recent lessons of Hawthorn and Richmond are, once you get a hold of the competition, there are multiple flags to be won. So Geelong didn't quite have a hold because they had St Kilda and Collingwood who were interspersed, and they were all vying to be the best team in it. St Kilda were the best team for good periods of that slot. Collingwood were the best team. Geelong picked off the 3 flags. St Kilda were empty-handed. Collingwood got theirs. Once Richmond got hold of it, they won 3 out of 4, and they get beaten on a preliminary final night, having lived the year as the best team. And Hawthorn, once they came through, once they accumulated their scarring and imposed themselves on the competition, they ruled, not in a manner, they didn't rule every week, but they ruled the competition when it mattered. So I think that's the opportunity for Melbourne. I'm not saying that it's a lock to happen.
Yeah.
I think that's their opportunity. They have more, for me, they have more pieces than you're entitled to have. Their dip to 17th gives them those two bonus pieces of Jackson and Picker, which will be profound.
Yeah,
I feel like when Richmond won their flags, thought, well, that's 2 of how many? And it's been 2 of 3. I feel like for Melbourne, they will win another one in this stretch, whether it's back-to-back. I feel like they would, you don't overachieve, you underachieve when you win a flag. they look to me like a team that will win multiple premierships.
Yeah, and we've sat here at the start of the following season multiple times. Collingwood, 2010, they'll win 2 or 3. 2016, Dogs, they'll win 2 or 3. We've done this regularly. It doesn't fall that way. For whatever reason, the footy gods don't allow you to run riot. Richmond won those 3 flags and finished 3rd on the table at the end of the home and away season. So there are other teams that challenge. So Brisbane have had home finals the last couple of years, blown them. Port Adelaide have had home finals, blown them. Significant finals, preliminary finals. So the margins are so small. And I just think a player here, a player there, a performance here, someone taking that next step as a 21, 22-year-old into your 3rd, 4th year. That's what we're talking about. Did Melbourne max out last year? Are you going to get the same out of Bailey Fritsch that you got last year? I could see him having a 30-goal year and saying, you know what, that's not a bad year. It's not a 60-goal year. It's not 6 in the grand final, but he could be a nice contributor. Does Lever have the same year? Do the on-ballers have absolutely the same year? Like, you're not asking for a massive drop-off. You're just saying 5%, 10%. Do teams do different tactically? Do they play differently against Melbourne? Melbourne have that holding defender, that paddock defender. Teams would be studying that and saying, how do we get around this? It's not as simple for me as you've still got to qualify. You've still got to get yourself to the grid. And I know they'll be top of our seedings because they've earned that right. But you've still got to find your way into a top 4 in 6 months' time.
Do you think there's a bracket of teams who can go with Melbourne, or there's one? What's your setup?
No, I think there's a bracket. I seriously think the Lions are going to be there. I've got enormous belief in Sydney running ahead of time. I think they've changed their midfield mix. They've passed the baton to these younger guys that are desperate to impact AFL. They're not your normal player just rolling in and happy to play AFL footy. They want to dominate. They've been elite academy picks, some of them, and the rest have been dragged along and swept along with them. Guys like Warner, guys like McInerney are going to be serious AFL footballers this year. The McCartan piece at centre-half back is significant because that's what they didn't have. Heath Grundy retired a couple of years ago, and they sort of have lacked that piece. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can offer. I think the McDonald will provide some support later in the season for Franklin, not so much early in the year. The extra ruckman of Laddams to go forward and be a target as well. He's a goal kicker. So I can see Sydney coming. I still think the Dogs are going to be there, and we'll get to those, them specifically later on. I don't know about Essendon, and I don't know about the Giants. I feel like they're 12 months away. But you're talking about one-off finals. When you get to the end of the discussion, I don't know about whether you can win it or whether you can't win it. It's all about, can you qualify for a preliminary final?
Yeah, and that's why we set preliminary final integrity as the marker.
Yeah, so get to top 4. You would say logic says Melbourne they're in the 4. Wherever they finish, they're in the 4. But the other 3 are seriously good teams.
Our pre-season means test. So we've got a big issue that we beautifully disagree on.
So before we start, Jared, I'm with Steve. Can you run through your predictions for last year and give us an idea of how close you got? Now, Steve, no one gets these right. This is why we do them, because we give you an opportunity to give it to us all year. And I think the other messages coming through are Richmond playing this year. They're the other team we probably haven't touched enough on.
They're my one team who can go with Melbourne. If Melbourne, so I'll put the if on the front of it. If Melbourne further the standard, so you're running the measure, it's only 5% drop. Well, what if it's a 5%, 10% rise? And that's what I anticipate. I think Melbourne are only just getting started. So if Melbourne lift the standard further, who could go with it? Richmond are the only team to my eye who could go with it. This is and it's not a 23-round measure. It's what does it all look like once we get to the end point. So I'm on red alert for Richmond. I am a believer that they're not finished. I think their measure is being used as the end of Brisbane and the end of Hawthorn, and I totally get that. But Geelong are a much better measure for them. So after 2011, Geelong lost an elimination final the next year and then went straight back to the top 2. So their dip stayed in the 8 but went out to Fremantle. Richmond's dip is to miss. I can easily see them straight back into the top 2.
I'm a massive believer in this football club. Damien Hardwick tapped into people and players like no one else. And I think that the recruitment of Robbie Tarrant hasn't been spoken enough about. It's a Brian Lake style event that you can come in and just lock down a position down back, which is hard to fill. And if you've got any vulnerability at fullback, you pay a price at the pointy end of the year. That will be sorted. They've got to keep him on the park. Obviously, it's been a challenge the last few years. But this slingshot brand of football, the three-man weave they get going quicker than any other team. And I've watched them and listened to them speak. They're going to play with gears this year. It's not always going to be flat out. So they're going to have different ways of getting you. So I'm going to watch them. I think there could be some big results in round one, Jared, and we'll get to that later. But I think Richmond are going to make a statement on Thursday night. And I know where everyone's bullish on Carlton and how good they've been and where they're at, but they turned the ball over 95 times against Melbourne, and Melbourne didn't really nail them because they're finding their way back into football after a premiership, which can have some teething issues. If they turn the ball over 95 times against the Tigers, they'll lose by 15 goals. It is as simple as that. No one punishes like Richmond.
Yep.
No one. So I think that they're the ones that are going to make a statement. And the other game up north, Brisbane versus Port Adelaide, that's a fascination for me because the Lions, I think it's been a pre-season of anger. They've let themselves down again. When the moments were there to be taken, they didn't take them in the last final series. They've challenged everyone to get better. The every little thing counts type approach. I just think they might make a statement early too.
So the best bits is round one, isn't it? The setup for round one is glorious.
Yeah.
It's genius, really, the way that having the Victorian teams play each other to reignite footy in Melbourne, and then the matchups through good management, and then a little slice of luck. Like suddenly West Coast, Gold Coast is amongst the most intriguing for all sorts of perverse reasons.
Where do you sit there? I mean, we're going to have to live with this a bit, aren't we? There's going to be some impact through the course of the year, but nothing like how the West Coast have been impacted for round one.
No. So this is obviously the worst bit of the setup for the weekend is, and we sort of know what the next 6 weeks looks like in Perth, and it's pretty grim. It's going to be incredibly disruptive. They're going to wear, the Eagles and the Dockers are going to wear the brunt of it unless they leave their state and seek sanctuary somewhere else. I like that. I don't think we held much of a candle for West Coast anyway, but to be decimated in such a manner heading in as if the injuries weren't bad enough, and then COVID takes players away.
Just track forward 2 or 3 weeks for me, okay? You're the West Coast Eagles and you're playing a game in Melbourne. How many players do you bring across?
Yeah, so it is interesting.
How many do you bring?
43.
You're bringing a lot. You're staying here. But if you're not staying here, if you're the fly in, fly out model.
So there's no point fly in, fly out. You either have to get out and try to avoid the COVID rise that is inevitable in Perth on the modelling in the next 4 to 6 weeks, or you just stay and wear it and accept that you're not going to have a first choice team during that run. Once COVID's in your club, you're going to be disrupted for multiple weeks on the bounce.
I wouldn't be surprised if we have a game called off because the West Coast or Fremantle get impacted with 8 cases upon arrival. And there's or the day after, the day of the game. And it's going to permeate through the team and all sorts of problems happen. And so how many do you bring? Do you bring 25? Do you bring 28? And then you've got problems with getting back. You go back and then you travel 2 weeks later. You can't bring that same 28 because they've already missed effectively a game. So there's all sorts of management issues that the West Coast and Fremantle have to put up with in a perfect season, an unimpacted season. This is more than a curveball. This whole West Australian situation, and it's ruined the West Coast for 3 years. They're having to get out, all the problems, and I know he's missed a popularity over there, but by God, has he impacted this campaign?
The pressure index. All right. Frame me a question for North Melbourne and Hawthorn.
Well, all right, this is really simplistic. But should a first-year rebuilding coach beat a second-year rebuilding coach?
No, the second-year rebuilding coach should be winning.
So that's Mitchell versus Noble.
Yeah.
12 months head start, an extra pre-season, which is significant. The first pre-season might be spent correcting fitness levels and The off season you might take a different tack with your drafting or your mature age recruits, your traded acquisitions, and then the second year you get that real advantage. It's going to be a big result. This I can't help but think that the Kangaroos should be winning this, given that it's second year rather than first year, and Hawthorn have been uninspiring through the pre-season period. You know, when it was the first three quarters against Collingwood was a big margin, something like 17 goals to 4 at three-quarter time, rather than the last three quarters were skewed. And then again against the Tigers, it was 7-goal first term. So 7-goal first terms to the opposition in both games. So that's the watch for me. I'm more fascinated in those sorts of games this weekend. And then not for the reasons that we're talking about with trying to work out who's going to be a top four, but who's just off the pace and how far off the pace. So that's where it sits for me, Jerry. Where do you
So
sit?
I'm a little bit longer term. So pressure index, Bulldogs have to be making top four now. So they've made their challenges from outside the top four. They won their flag from 7th. They made a grand final from 5th. They lived most of the year in the top 2 last year and then fumbled their position late. So be making the top 4 and really be making the top 2. But so time for the Bulldogs to make the top 4 for me. And then Essendon are going to be a deep fascination anyway, and Mick Malthouse has sort of magnified that. I think they know well where they are, but is that ready to win a final or not? So in their development, and they're a couple of years away from becoming a consistent premiership contender by their own books, are they ready to win a final this year? And that's going to be, I think, an elimination final. And there's an awful lot of judgment on how their year unfolds. It's going to rest in one performance at the end of it.
An elimination final. When was the last time that the Dogs finished top 4, Jared?
I imagine in the Rodney Eade days when they were making those preliminary finals against St Kilda.
2010, yep. And top 2 was 1998. They're big markers, aren't they? I mean, they were 19 weeks, I think it was, of the season in the top 2.
Yeah.
So it depends where you sit. I mean, they had a horror last 3 weeks when they lost Josh Bruce. And it did rock. They lost him in a bad time and were lucky to recover, really. Not lucky, that's not right. They did a great job.
They did a great job to recover.
Yeah. So I just
stirring finals performances.
Yeah.
But that's a hard way to live. The way to win flags is to have that position in the top 4. You can't be scrounging at the end, exhausting campaigns at the end of every in 16. I think they did a brilliant job to be 3 goals up halfway through the third quarter last year. But if you're truly going to stage the revolution, is be finishing in the top 4.
So I'll give you my thoughts on winning premierships or making grand finals, and we're only talking about preliminary final. All year, that's all we'll talk about. But if you're going to win a grand final or make a grand final, you have to be different. Only different wins in AFL footy. Now, whether that's different people, Beveridge is different. He attacks the mind more than he does the tactical side of the game. But they play a different brand. They don't necessarily rely on the spine. They don't necessarily rely on a ruckman. They've just got a dozen midfielders that find a way to just continually rack up possessions and overlap and get the ball in deep. So they do it a different way. Melbourne did it a different way. Max Gawn is a different human. He's the most different and unique captain that they have ever had. And that's exactly what they needed. And they got a different coach. I saw him with you last night. He's a different guy. And they play a different brand. And we'll get to the specifics or the mechanics of how they play and why it's so different. Richmond have been successful. They play a different brand of footy. Only different wins in the AFL. If you're the same as someone else, you're not winning it. So some of the teams to me are a little bit same. That's why you've got to find what. It's not necessarily a point of difference. Is you've got to have different individuals or a different mode. There has to be something quite unique and special about you.
The debate is always what to expect from the game itself. Kingy, give me 3. Your first is life without targets.
Life without targets. Are you a believer that you need 1, maybe 2 targets forward of centre to give that predictability for the smalls? They know where the ball's going. Then you can lock the ball in the forward half. All those sorts of things that coaches talk about. So we're going to have Port Adelaide without Dixon, Fremantle without Taberner, West Coast probably without Darling for a couple of weeks, you'd say. Gold Coast without Ben King. I mean, who is Collingwood's target? Who is that? Mason Cox, they went to 10 times last week, and the team didn't really get anything, any productivity out of that. It's Norton, then who? It's Buddy. It's Buddy, but if Buddy gets held by a Taylor or a Davis, who is it then? So I think life without targets is going to be a discussion for us the next few weeks. Melbourne have got Fritz at full forward and Brown, who looks seriously healthy, and McDonald. So they've got heaps of targets. The Dogs have only got the one in Norton. You go to Sydney, have only got the one. You go to Brisbane, who've got Hipwood, who's going to miss the first 3 months of the season minimum. And you've got Danaher and McStay down there, and then a Rain and McCarthy type. They've got those smalls that can rear up and catch the ball. But as a bona fide target, a lot of questions were asked about Joe Danaher last year. Is he that man? Yep. So I just think if you haven't got them in the games that matter, the games around your like types are when they really come home to roost. And that's probably why I'm worried about Port Adelaide this Saturday.
What's the lot of the halfback flanker?
Well, the halfback flank has it become a safe haven for ageing gun midfielders? Is my question. And I'm fine with that if that's the case. So we see Kennedy go back there. We see Pendlebury go back. We see Callum Ward go back. We've seen Heppel go back last year. We've seen Zeeble go back last year. So there's more of it happening, And I just wonder, what does it do? Does it actually help, or is it just he's a great player? Okay, we're evolving. We need more opportunity for younger players. Just put him to halfback. Does it help you win? And I just want to put a little asterisk on that. Does it help you win? It may find you a spot for Kennedy, and it may find you a spot for some of those other guys like Callum Ward. But are they just midfielders? Because I saw Callum Ward get caught out a couple of times last week, where his man just classic half forward goals. They just take one step forward of the play in anticipation of something happening before the midfield type who's nose to the ball. They've got that nose ring in, the old Bull's nose ring, Gerard, and they just pull you into the footy. One step's enough to get you. So that's what I'm looking for this weekend. But in saying that, I think it's a great position for Scott Pendlebury. And I think it's a position that he can play for the next 3 to 4 years to become the game's record holder for the AFL. I think he can challenge Brent Harvey. He's on 330.
Really?
He's on 334.
Yep.
So Burma was 432, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong there. 430.
Oh, so he's got to play 5 more seasons.
Well, four full seasons, and then if he's somewhere near close enough, Gerard, you're not saying hang up the boots on 425, are you?
No,
you're just not doing that. So I think if because he's so creative, he's a different discussion to the others because he sees the game so well. We talk about his spatial awareness. I think that he could go back there and have, he could have top 8, top 5, best and fairest type years back there across halfback.
And you don't like the paddock defender?
Well, I'm interested in the paddock defence. So no one really copied Richmond's method. No one. There's little bits at Essendon at the moment, and there's little bits with Craig McRae at Collingwood. But it's not a copy, if you like. It's not. Let's mimic what they've done so successfully over the previous 5 years. The biggest thing that I think Melbourne have brought to the game is that paddock defender, the guy that just holds. He's 100 metres behind the ball, and it looks ridiculous. You look at the ground, you see him just holding it. It might be Stephen May. It was Petty for large chunks of last year. It could be Lever, but usually it's those taller fullback types. I wonder whether other teams are going to mimic that this year. And if they do, what does that do to our competition? What does that do to scoring? Because it's almost the human stop sign. That if you're looking to come quick and you just got that one guy, you can't kick it over the back and get that stroll-in goal. Mm-hmm. So the speedy half forward, he just gets shut down straight away. So what will teams do to challenge that paddock defender? Will they carry the ball? This is why Richmond is such a fascination. If they can play that 3-man weave, carrying it at that defender, he's gone. He's got no play. One man running up against 3, it's just, pick your poison. So if you can carry it through, you can really hurt that player. But how many teams do that? So I'm interested to see how teams, how coaches analyse getting hold of Melbourne's paddock defender. And then on the flip side of that, I'm looking to see how many teams actually now have a paddock defender.
Don't put any rules around the seedings this year. Just throw them around every week. From around, punish teams, reward teams overly. Overreact every week. That's my mantra with the Seedings.
I liked your...
And I overreact every week.
Yeah, I like that. In the end, I was a fan of that.
Yeah.
I had too many rules. But my rule is you have to have Melbourne 1.
Yes.
Have you got Melbourne 1?
I do.
Excellent. I've stuck with Brisbane. I think Brisbane are the force that have just lost in moments over the last couple of years and have had a pretty good off-season. So Brisbane at 2 for me.
I'm going Richmond at 2. I'm pinning my flag to that mast.
Wow. I've got Richmond at 3.
Mm-hmm. I've got the Bulldogs at 3.
Oh.
I just want to see the first few weeks, but I think what they did in the final series last year is worthy of being there. 4.
I got Sydney. I'm a big believer in the Swans,
Yeah, you are.
and maybe I'm overs on them.
You're an early adopter there too.
Yeah, I might have just gone a fraction earlier.
No, well, you saw them right at the start last year. So you've left the Dogs out of the 4?
I have, because I just think next week we'll be saying, gee, Melbourne are good. And they may just be a bit more advanced than them at the minute.
Yeah, so my straight up error is I've gone Port at 4.
Port, yeah.
And left the Lions out. And that will only last until the end of the weekend.
I expect to see a tweet.
Just a straight up error.
Saturday night, I think they play. Saturday night at about 11 o'clock, I just want to say, yep, 4th seed change.
That just gives me room to move next Monday.
The beauty is everyone's live. This round is a ripper because you're playing like types. So this is probably the best guide for one round of football that we've had for some time.
Yeah, I'm not... Leave me out of the round 1 doesn't mean anything discussion. I'm not participating in that.
Get ahead of it. If you start 0-2, you're a 10% chance of making the finals, Jared. It's important.
The means test with David King sets you up on season's eve. We're going to revel in the Cam Smith victory next.